Hi, I know I'm just a cat, but I believe in kindness. If you click subscribe under this video, you'll make my day.
You ever had one of those moments where a laugh cuts deeper than any insult? Where someone doesn't even need to say your name for you to know? They're talking about you, mocking you, stripping away years of effort, generosity, and unspoken sacrifice with just a chuckle? That fake kind of laugh. The one that's meant to sound innocent, but carries that smug undercurrent. Like you're the idiot in the room and everyone else is in on a joke you've been too naive to notice. That was me last Thursday. 46 years old, successful in my work, independent to a fault, and suddenly feeling like the world's biggest fool at my own damn dining room table. It started out the same way it always did, me planning our annual family cookout. Not some tiny little affair either. I'm talking about coolers full of drinks, full catering orders with ribs, brisket, potato salad that doesn't taste like paste, rentals for tables and chairs, citronella torches, playlists, even a bouncy house once when Rachel's kids were smaller. And I paid for it all, not because I had to, not because anyone ever asked me directly, but because somewhere along the way it just became expected. Like the sun coming up or Aunt June being casually racist. It just was. No one ever said thank you. Hell, no one ever even offered to chip in more than a bag of chips or some store-bought cookies. And even that was usually forgotten in someone's trunk until the end of the night. This year was supposed to be like all the others. I was halfway through confirming the order with a local smokehouse. Good people, not cheap, but worth it, when I heard it. I'd stepped out of the room for just a second, left my phone on the table, and when I came back, I paused just outside the kitchen because I heard laughter. Not just any laughter, Rachel's. That hyena cackle she tries to pass off as charming. And then came the words that might as well have been a slap in the face. Let her pay. It makes her feel useful. Useful, like I was some kind of charity case. Like I needed to pay for their good time just to feel like I mattered. I didn't even walk back in. I just stood there, invisible for those few seconds, and let their voices carry on like I wasn't 3 feet away. I heard my brother Mark grunt in that lazy, non-committal way of his, the kind of sound he makes when he knows someone said something out of line, but doesn't want to start anything. Rachel just kept on giggling. Seriously, she said, she's got no husband, no kids, might as well have something to do. I wish I could say I barged in and told her off, flipped the table, made a scene like in those dramatic movies where the music swells and someone finally grows a spine. But I didn't. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds more, something heavy and burning settling into my gut like bad whiskey, and then I turned around, walked upstairs to my office, and sat down at my computer, and I canceled everything. The caterer, the rental company, even the damn porta potty I had ordered because Uncle Ron refuses to use anyone's bathroom but his own. I didn't say a word, not to Rachel, not to Mark, not to anyone. The group chat was already buzzing later that night, full of useless questions and emoji-filled suggestions. Rachel naturally was first to notice that the usual confirmation email hadn't gone out. Hey Elaine, did you send the head count to Smokies yet? She wrote. I let it sit. 5 minutes, 10. Then she followed up. I just talked to Dave and he said they're booked that weekend now. You didn't cancel, did you? That double question mark was her signature. Half accusation, half cluelessness. I wanted to scream at her, tell her that I canceled because I was tired of being their unpaid event planner and personal ATM. But instead, I sat back, poured myself a glass of Malbec, and watched the slow-motion unraveling unfold. Aunt June chimed in next, of course, asking if there'd be alternative provisions and reminding everyone about her dietary restrictions as if anyone had ever cared before. Mark sent a shrug emoji, classic Mark. And while the chaos stirred, I just sat in my living room, perfectly still, watching the screen like it was some twisted little reality show where the prize wasn't money, but finally being seen for what I'd truly become, a ghost with a credit card. The irony wasn't lost on me. All these years, I thought I was holding my family together by throwing these parties, by keeping traditions alive. by giving everyone a place to pretend we were close. But all it took was one laugh, one offhanded, shitty little comment to make me realize I'd only been buying a seat at a table where no one cared if I showed up at all. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was hurt, though I was, but because something had clicked. A kind of calm I hadn't felt in years. Not the nervous kind that comes before a confrontation, but the sharp, surgical kind that comes right before a decision. For the first time, I realized I didn't owe them a damn thing. Not a burger, not a chair, not a bottle of water. And if they wanted to have their little cookout, then let them. Let Rachel coordinate food for 25 people. Let Mark figure out how to borrow folding chairs from the church. Let Aunt June bring her own damn coleslaw. I was done. And the best part? They had no idea yet. They still thought I was just late, maybe distracted, maybe working late like I always do. But I had already made up my mind. I was going to watch it burn, not with gasoline and fire, but with silence. Because sometimes silence is louder than any speech. Sometimes the best revenge isn't confrontation, it's absence. They'd find out soon enough. There's a particular kind of pleasure, a quiet, simmering satisfaction, in watching people who've taken you for granted for years suddenly realize the rug they've been standing on was yours the whole time. And you've just yanked it out from under them, without so much as a warning, without a single scream or dramatic gesture. Just a cold, precise absence that says everything words never could. That's exactly what I felt the next morning as I scrolled through the family group chat, still wrapped in my robe, cradling a second cup of coffee that tasted better than any meal I'd ever paid for them to eat. It was unfolding beautifully, like a car crash you can't look away from, slow, chaotic, and full of that desperate confusion people show when the person they expect to clean up the mess suddenly isn't there anymore. It started simple, the way it always does when people don't want to admit they're panicking. Mark was the first to break the silence with a message that read, "Hey, did we ever land on a head count for Saturday?" Like he hadn't been in the kitchen 2 nights ago, like he didn't grunt and glance at his beer while Rachel sliced me open with that one line, that one smug little jab about me feeling useful. I didn't reply, obviously. I just watched as the read receipts lit up beside his message, one by one, like little digital eyes opening in confusion. Rachel jumped in next, of course, because she always needs to be the one directing the flow, pretending like she's organizing when in reality, she's just throwing opinions around like darts with no target. "I'm assuming Elaine's got it covered like always," she wrote, adding a laugh at the end, which only made the memory of her actual laugh echo louder in my head. That twisted little giggle that had started all of this. It was like watching someone build their own gallows and not even realizing they were holding the hammer and nails. Then came Aunt June, the queen of passive aggression, who always manages to make her guilt trips sound like compliments dipped in syrup and condescension. "I'm sure she's just been busy, poor thing," she wrote, as if I was overwhelmed, as if I hadn't made a crystal clear decision to disengage from the circus they call family. "She always works so hard, bless her heart," she added, which in Southern woman code roughly translates to, "We all know she's being difficult, but let's pretend we're saints." It took everything in me not to respond, not to type out some long, cathartic monologue about how they'd turn me into the help, silent, reliable, invisible, except when something went wrong. I could have reminded them of every single year I'd covered their excuses. Rachel claiming Dave's hours got cut, Mark's truck needing a surprise repair, Aunt June's fixed income, the time I drove 2 towns over to pick up homemade pies because everyone agreed store-bought was unacceptable, even though not one of them offered to split the cost or so much as gas money. But I didn't. I kept sipping my coffee and let the silence thicken. And then the tone shifted. Rachel's next message was sharper. "Elaine?" Just my name, no punctuation, like she was knocking on a door she wasn't sure was still attached to the house. Then again, harder. "I talked to Smokies. They said we lost our slot for Saturday. Did something happen?" There it was, the double question mark, the rising tension, the moment she realized something had cracked beneath her feet. I imagined her face, all pinched and confused, trying to figure out what she'd missed, what switch had been flipped without her knowing. And I smiled. They started tossing around backup plans. Someone, Mark maybe, suggested they just do something low-key in Rachel's backyard. Rachel, unsurprisingly, balked at the idea, complaining about space, Dave's allergies, the dog shedding, the kids making a mess. Aunt June offered to bring her famous deviled eggs, as if that would somehow replace an entire smoked brisket and 3 sides. Mark said he might be able to swing by Costco, which, considering his track record, meant he would show up late with a rotisserie chicken and a dented bag of ice. By late afternoon, the group chat had turned into a game of hot potato, each person trying to offload responsibility without actually saying what they all knew, but none of them dared admit. That without me, none of them had the bandwidth, organization, or willingness to pull this thing together. And instead of stepping up, they started unraveling. Small comments turned pointed. "Well, I don't have a grill big enough for everyone," Rachel wrote. "Not my fault the plans changed," Mark shot back. Aunt June told them all to stop bickering and act like adults, which was rich coming from the woman who once refused to attend a baby shower because she wasn't allowed to bring her dog. And while they scrambled, I posted a photo to my Instagram story, just a shot of my view from the balcony, coffee cup in hand, captioned with a simple line, "Saturdays are better when they're quiet." It wasn't directed at anyone, and yet I knew exactly who would see it and how it would hit. That story was viewed by Rachel within 3 minutes. Mark saw it not long after. Aunt June doesn't have Instagram, but trust me, Rachel would show her, probably while hissing about me behind her teeth, like I'd committed some personal betrayal instead of just declining to fund their summer party. And that's when it hit me, not just that they were unraveling, but that they were mad. Genuinely, stupidly mad. Not confused, not hurt, not even disappointed. They were pissed because I'd quietly stepped out of the role they never asked if I wanted, but always expected me to play. I'd stopped being the glue, and now they were just crumbs, tumbling off the edge of a plate no one was holding anymore. And here's the best part. None of them asked me why. Not once. No one picked up the phone to check in, to ask if I was okay, to wonder if maybe, just maybe, something had pushed me to the edge. They didn't care about the why. They only cared about the hole I left behind. And I intended to leave it empty. There's a special kind of irony in watching people fumble through a mess they spent years pretending didn't exist, especially when that mess had always been neatly swept under the rug you provided, year after year, without thanks, without question, and certainly without acknowledgement. So when Saturday finally rolled around, the same day that, for the past 10 summers, had always been filled with laughter, music, the smell of grilled meat, and just enough illusion to make us all feel like a family, I found myself in a different position, one I had never dared to imagine, let alone enjoy. And it was from the comfort of my own balcony, glass of chilled white wine in hand, that I finally witnessed the collapse of a tradition that had never really belonged to anyone but me. The morning started slow, deliberately so, because I had no reason to rush, no caterer to coordinate, no rental trucks to supervise, no coolers to load with ice that would melt faster than anyone bothered to notice. I took my time brewing my coffee, lingering in my kitchen in a silk robe I rarely wore, simply because the day finally belonged to me, and I wanted to feel every inch of that quiet victory. I played music that wasn't curated to please a crowd, let the scent of fresh lemons and basil from my little herb garden take over the space where, in years past, the sharp tang of barbecue sauce and charcoal would dominate for hours. By early afternoon, I saw the first signs of their desperation below. Rachel's backyard, visible from the far end of my second-floor balcony, was an unremarkable patch of uneven grass, framed by a tired wooden fence and 2 plastic lawn chairs that had seen too many summers and too few hose downs. I watched from behind the tinted glass of my patio doors as Dave wrestled with a grill that clearly hadn't been cleaned since last Labor Day, while Rachel stood nearby, arms crossed, giving instructions she probably thought sounded helpful, but clearly only fueled the tension already clinging to the humid air like a film of sweat. One of their boys, I think it was Tyler, kicked at a deflated beach ball with visible disdain, and the other two looked like they were trying to figure out how long they had to be outside before someone let them back in with an iPad and a can of soda. Mark arrived next, predictably late, carrying a flimsy aluminum tray that he immediately handed off like a cursed object. I squinted and saw what looked like store-bought potato salad, sweating in the sun before it even hit the folding table. Aunt June came hobbling in shortly after, muttering something to Rachel with a hand dramatically pressed to her lower back, probably about the lack of shade or how the food was too salty or not salty enough. Her default complaints, depending on the year. From up here, the scene looked more like a gathering of reluctant neighbors than a family celebration, and I felt a strange cocktail of emotions. Vindication, certainly, but also a deep, unfamiliar ache. Not regret exactly, but the residue of something once meaningful that had now curdled under the weight of expectation and unspoken resentment. Still, I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't even open the balcony door. I just sat, cool glass in hand, and watched. At some point, Rachel made a show of calling everyone over to the table, announcing that lunch was ready, though the tone of her voice betrayed how little she believed the words. Dave flipped some overcooked burgers onto a chipped serving platter, while Mark rummaged around for ketchup, knocking over a stack of flimsy paper plates in the process. No one laughed. Not the kids, not the adults. It was the kind of silence that wasn't caused by reverence or anticipation, but by the slow realization that this wasn't working, that something vital was missing. And none of them were brave enough to say it. And then, as if the universe had decided to add insult to injury, the clouds rolled in. Not the dramatic kind that bring thunder and a good excuse to end things early, but the slow, heavy ones that just hang above you, squeezing out humidity and making everything feel a few degrees more uncomfortable. I took another sip of wine and leaned back in my chair, letting the condensation on the glass slide over my fingers like a tiny, elegant reward. Somewhere below, Rachel looked up. For a second, just a flicker, I could see her eyes meet mine. And even from that distance, I could tell she knew. She knew I had watched this whole thing unfold. She knew I had stayed quiet on purpose. And most importantly, she knew that this mess, this sad little imitation of what we used to have, was on her. Not because she said the words, though she did, but because they all let it happen, and none of them had the spine to admit it until it was too late. She turned back quickly, muttering something to Aunt June, who had started fanning herself with a paper plate, clearly unimpressed by the turn of events. Mark stood off to the side, staring at his phone like he wasn't related to any of them. And the kids had retreated under the deck, probably trying to connect to a neighbor's Wi-Fi. I didn't post anything that afternoon. No cryptic stories, no subtle jabs, just the silence, just the choice to sit above the chaos rather than inside it. And that, I think, was louder than any words I could have spoken. They could barbecue all they wanted. They could slap together burgers and pretend the coleslaw wasn't warm. They could laugh, perform, pose for photos they'd later post with forced captions about family time and making memories. But I knew the truth, and so did they. They didn't miss the party. They missed me. It's a funny thing, really, the way solitude can feel like salvation when you've spent too long performing in rooms full of people who see your effort as obligation and your presence as default, rather than choice. Because the truth is, I didn't miss that gathering. Not the noise, not the forced laughter, not the backhanded compliments or the paper-thin gestures of appreciation that barely mask the entitlement simmering just beneath the surface. What I discovered instead, as that failed barbecue faded into memory like a weak echo, was that when the weight of everyone else's expectations falls away, you're left with the remarkable quiet of your own clarity, and in that quiet, I decided it was time to celebrate on my own terms. The day after the backyard disaster, when my phone had stopped buzzing with vague messages and not-so-subtle attempts at guilt-tripping, I woke up to the first Sunday morning I can remember where I didn't feel responsible for making other people's weekends better. The house was cool, clean, and still smelled faintly of the lemon oil I'd used the night before to wipe down the counters, because even though there'd been no guests, I had taken the time to set everything just how I liked it. Fresh flowers in the entryway, soft jazz in the background, flickering candles that scented the air with sandalwood and honey, all of it arranged not to impress but simply to soothe. It was a different kind of hosting myself, and in many ways it felt more honest, more deliberate, more luxurious than anything I'd ever done for them. By mid-morning, I was in the kitchen preparing a meal I actually wanted to eat. Not the endless trays of safe food I used to order for picky eaters who wouldn't touch anything that wasn't drowning in barbecue sauce or smothered in cheddar. I roasted vegetables with garlic and rosemary, seared scallops in a pan that hadn't seen real use in months, poured myself a tall glass of orange blossom wine. I'd been saving for a special occasion and decided, with zero hesitation, that this moment of calm, this reclaiming of space, was special enough. I plated everything with care, sat at my dining table with a cloth napkin in my lap and linen draped over the back of the chair, and I ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite like it was proof that I didn't need chaos to feel full. Later, I stepped out onto my balcony again. Not to spy, not to gloat, but to enjoy the breeze. And I saw what was left of yesterday's poor attempt at a family event. The sagging folding table still standing like a forgotten prop in some sad stage play, the lawn littered with crumpled napkins and half-deflated balloons, a trash bag bulging and slumped in a corner of the yard like an afterthought. No one was outside, no laughter echoed through the neighborhood, and the only movement came from a stray cat picking through the remnants of someone's abandoned plate. It struck me then that what they'd built in my absence wasn't a celebration at all. It was a placeholder, a shell, something constructed from habit rather than heart. Around noon, I posted a few photos to my social feed, not because I wanted to provoke anyone, but because I felt like documenting the beauty of a day spent without compromise. The light streaming through the curtains, the gold-rimmed glass beside my lunch plate, the book I'd cracked open for the third time but finally had the piece to finish. I didn't tag anyone, didn't add captions dripping in passive aggression, just let the images speak for themselves. But I knew exactly who'd see them, and I knew what conclusions they'd draw. It didn't take long for the messages to start. The first was from Mark, who kept things as vague and non-committal as ever. "You good?" 2 words, no punctuation, like he was throwing a rope without any real intention of pulling me in. I didn't respond right away. A few hours later came Aunt June's voicemail, full of dramatic sighs and phrases like "worried sick" and "family's supposed to stick together," though she conveniently skipped over any mention of the cookout or the fact that no one had stuck with me when I needed support. Back when the burden of hosting had become more than just a financial drain, it had been emotional erosion, years in the making, but the one that hit the hardest, or maybe just confirmed everything I already suspected, came from Rachel. She didn't bother with subtlety. "You think you're better than us," she wrote, "but you're just lonely and bitter. You always have been." And that was it. No greeting, no build-up, just that venom spat like a final blow from someone who couldn't bear the mirror I'd held up. I read it twice, then put my phone down without replying, because honestly, there was nothing left to say. Rachel had always needed to believe I played the role of hostess because I had nothing else, that my acts of generosity were born from a pathetic craving to belong, that somehow, by opening my wallet and my home, I was proving my worth in a world where I had none otherwise. But she was wrong. I didn't pay for those gatherings because I needed their approval. I paid because I thought we were building something together, something warm, something consistent in a world that often felt anything but. I did it because I wanted to believe that love, when given freely, could be enough to hold people together. But now, watching the digital fallout from my absence, seeing how quickly their smiles crumbled when the scaffolding was gone, I realized that what I'd been offering all those years wasn't love, it was service. And no one ever thanks the waiter when the tip's been baked into the bill. So I threw myself a different kind of party. I turned up the music, poured another glass, lit candles even though it was still light outside. I danced a little, barefoot on the cool tile floor, feeling, for the first time in ages, that I wasn't performing. I was living. And if they wanted to see that as bitterness, let them. If Rachel needed to call it loneliness to feel better about her own life, Let her. I knew the truth. This wasn't bitterness. It was peace. And peace, I found, doesn't need an audience. There's a particular silence that comes in the days after you decide to step off a stage. You were never asked if you wanted to be on in the first place, a silence not born of peace, though peace eventually settles in like a warm coat after a long storm, but of tension, of everyone else finally feeling the weight of the gap you've left behind, though none of them are brave or self-aware enough to name it. It's a silence filled with unsent messages, conversations rehearsed but never started, and long looks exchanged over family dinners that taste a little blander without you there to pay for the seasoning. And while they might not say it out loud, while they might bury it under snide comments or veiled accusations of selfishness, the truth is clear as glass. They feel your absence more than they ever acknowledged your presence. For 2 days, I let the dust settle. I didn't post, I didn't text, I didn't call, I didn't respond to Mark's non-committal check-ins or Aunt June's dramatic voicemails, dripping with veiled morality and faux concern. I didn't flinch when Rachel's messages turned from passive-aggressive jabs to outright venom. I sat with it all, the silence, the discomfort, the bruised part of me that had spent too many years pretending things were fine just to keep the illusion of closeness alive. And I let it throb until the pain dulled into something quieter, something sturdier. I had no more patience for patching up something they were never invested in protecting. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way Rachel probably hoped I'd be, the kind of fire that makes you lash out and embarrass yourself so they can call you hysterical and dismiss everything you felt. No, what I felt now wasn't fire, it was steel. I decided I wouldn't ghost them completely, because that's never been my style. I've never been one to disappear or play games. If I had something to say, I would say it directly and clearly so there would be no confusion. No room for interpretation, no softening of the truth to make it easier to swallow. So I poured myself one last glass of wine, not out of spite, but as a kind of ritual, a closing note to this strange and long overdue symphony, and I recorded a voice message. I didn't want it buried in text, where they could skim it and pretend they understood. I wanted them to hear it in my voice, the tone, the weight, the finality. I didn't rehearse it. I didn't write it out beforehand. I just pressed record, took a breath, and spoke. "You know, it's funny," I began, my voice steady, even, and sharper than they probably expected. For years, I thought doing things for all of you meant I was part of something bigger, something meaningful. But now I see it for what it was. I wasn't a sister, or a cousin, or a niece. I was a damn service, a hostess, a walking credit card with a smile painted on, so everyone else could eat for free and feel like they were part of a family. And you know what? I was okay with that, because I thought it meant something to you. I really did. I paused, just for a second, long enough to let the weight of that truth land. But last week, when I heard Rachel say it, let her pay, it makes her feel useful, everything changed. Because that's not something you say about someone you respect. That's not something you say about someone you love. That's something you say about a prop, and I'm no one's prop. I heard the wind pick up outside as I spoke, but I kept going because the words had waited long enough to be said. I didn't cancel the cookout to be cruel. I didn't step back to punish you. I stepped back because I realized that if I didn't, I'd be doing it until I was old and tired and broke and still invisible. And I'm done with that. I'm done showing up for people who treat me like a backup generator, only noticed when the lights go out. Another pause. Not dramatic, just deliberate. You don't have to like me for this. You don't even have to agree with me. But you will respect that I made a choice. A choice to stop pouring into something that never poured back. And if that makes me cold or bitter in your eyes, then so be it. I'd rather be bitter and free than sweet and used. I ended the message there. No apology, no soft exit. Just truth. I sent it to the family group chat and put my phone down. Not because I didn't care what they'd say, but because I already knew nothing they said would change what had already been done. The shift had happened. The role I'd played so long had been stripped from me, not by their hands, but by mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like something had been taken from me. I felt like I'd finally reclaimed it. Mark called the next day, not a text, not a shrugging emoji, but an actual call, which told me he'd finally figured out how serious this was. I let it ring twice before answering. He was quiet at first, breathing heavily, like he was working up the nerve to say something real for once in his life. When he finally spoke, it was with a kind of resignation I'd never heard from him. "You weren't wrong, Elle." That was it. No apology, no grand admission, but it was enough. Not because it fixed anything, but because it meant someone had finally seen it, had finally stopped pretending not to notice the years I'd spent making everything easier for everyone but myself. Rachel, of course, didn't respond. She unfollowed me on social media a few hours after I sent the message, which was honestly the most peaceful outcome I could have asked for. Aunt June sent me a Bible verse and a praying for your heart message that I ignored entirely. And just like that, the curtain finally closed. I stepped out onto my balcony again that evening, the sky burning orange and pink over the rooftops, the neighborhood slowly settling into dusk, and I felt it. That deep, quiet certainty that I'd done the right thing, even if it hurt, even if it was messy, even if it made me the villain in their version of the story. I toasted the sunset with the last of my wine, not to them, not to what used to be, but to what would come next. Next summer, I'll be on a beach somewhere, not because I'm running away from family, but because I'm finally choosing myself over obligation. And they can have their backyard barbecue. They can slap together something cheap and call it tradition. They can tell themselves whatever story they need to in order to sleep at night. But I won't be there. Let them eat gas station potato salad. I've had better.